So let's talk about Denmark. You might know it as the home of Lego, or maybe for its incredible design, but it's also got this amazing history as Europe's oldest kingdom. And man, what a story it is. We're talking huge empires, some really tough defeats, and then a total reinvention. It's a real roller coaster.
And that brings us to the really fascinating puzzle here, right? How on earth does a country go from being this major imperial power to losing pretty much everything, and then somehow end up as one of the happiest, most stable places on the planet? It's a wild paradox, and we're going to dig into it. All right, so here's our game plan. We'll start way back with Europe's oldest kingdom, then hit the famous Age of Vikings. After that, we'll look at Union and Reformation, the rise and fall of its empires, how it forged a modern nation, and finally, where Denmark stands in the world today.
Okay, first up, Europe's oldest kingdom. To really get the story, we have to go way, way back. I'm talking long before anyone had even heard of a Viking. We're going back to the Ice Age, when the land itself was just taking shape.
You know, the timescale here is just mind-boggling. We're talking 12,000 BC for the first people showing up. For thousands and thousands of years, before we even get to a king we can name, you had all these different groups settling the land. First hunter-gatherers, then farmers building these huge stone tombs you can still see today, and then a whole Bronze Age culture that was already showing signs of a pretty complex society.
And what's so cool about Denmark is how real all this ancient history feels. Because of the peat bogs there, things have been preserved in a way that's just unbelievable. We're not just talking about pottery shards, we're talking about actual people, like the famous Tolan man, preserved so well you can see the stubble on his face. These treasures, from sun chariots to these crazy detailed cauldrons, they paint a picture of a really sophisticated world, full of art, religion, and trade, all happening centuries before the first king's name was ever written down. And then you get this. This is the moment everything changes. This inscription comes from a massive runestone put up around 965 AD by a king you've probably heard of, Harald Bluetooth. Yep, that Bluetooth. And this stone is basically Denmark's birth certificate. It makes two huge statements for everyone to see. One, that he united all the Danes, and two, that he made them Christian. Boom, the Kingdom of Denmark is officially on the map. So, with a unified Christian kingdom, what happens next? Well, only its most famous, and let's be honest, most feared chapter, the Age of the Vikings. For the next 300 years or so, Danish Vikings were an absolute force of nature in Europe. Their secret weapon, the longship. This piece of technology was a total game changer. It let them sail anywhere, raid anywhere, and project power like nobody's business. But here's the thing, it wasn't all just smash and grab. They were also incredible explorers, savvy traders, and even settlers building new communities. And when you look at a map of where they went, it is just staggering. I mean, they settled Iceland and Greenland and almost certainly made it to North America. They sailed south to attack Spain and Italy. They conquered and ruled over half of England in a territory called the Danelaw. And their trade routes, they connected everywhere from Greenland all the way to Constantinople. They were truly global players. But, empires like that rarely last forever. And the end of the Viking Age didn't come from some big battle with a foreign army. It came from the inside. The last king to try and pull off a massive invasion of England, a guy named Canute IV, was actually killed by his own people. They rebelled while he was trying to gather his fleet, cornered him in a church, and that was that. His death in 1086 is pretty much seen as the curtain call for the Great Viking Age. All right, so the Viking Age is over. What's next? Well, Denmark shifts gears. The next few centuries are all about power, politics, and faith. They start building a new kind of empire, this time using royal marriages and politics instead of long ships and axes. And this leads to something huge. In 1397, an absolutely brilliant ruler, Queen Margaret I, pulls off something no Viking warlord ever managed. Through sheer political skill, she unites Denmark, Norway, and Sweden into one giant Scandinavian empire, the Kalmar Union. And for a while, with Denmark in the driver's seat, this thing was a real European superpower. Yeah, but holding an empire like that together is tough. The Swedes never really liked being ruled by the Danes, and things finally came to a head with the pretty horribly named Stockholm bloodbath. The Danish king had a bunch of Swedish nobles executed, and, well, that was it. Sweden was gone for good. This whole mess threw Denmark into chaos, and that turmoil created the perfect opening for a massive religious shift, the Protestant Reformation, to completely change the country. And now we get to a really tough part of the story. This is where things start to go downhill fast. After losing that big Scandinavian union, Denmark enters what you could call the Great Contraction. It's a long, painful period where, piece by piece, its empire gets taken away. So the first big hit comes from their old rival, Sweden, who's now getting really powerful. After a nasty war, Denmark loses a bunch of important islands. But the real kick in the teeth? They start losing their grip on the sound tolls. See, for centuries, Denmark had basically put a toll booth on the entrance to the Baltic Sea, and it made them fabulously wealthy. Now, that cash cow was in serious trouble. And if that was bad, just 13 years later, it got way, way worse. In a truly wild moment in military history, the Swedish army literally marched across the frozen sea to attack Denmark. The defeat was catastrophic. Denmark had to give up a third of its territory, the provinces on the other side of the Sound. And we're not talking about some faraway colony here. This was considered the Danish heartland. This one event changed the map of Scandinavia forever. The Swedes didn't stop there. They laid siege to Copenhagen itself, and it looked like Denmark might be completely wiped off the map. It was at this moment that King Frederick III said, "I will die in my nest." He refused to run. His courage rallied the people of the city, and they managed to hold on. They saved their country from being completely erased, but make no mistake, the Danish Empire was gone.
So what do you do when you lose your empire? Your army is crushed, and your whole identity as a major power is just gone. You have a massive identity crisis. But for Denmark, the answer was to completely reinvent itself, not by looking outward, but by looking inward. And you'd think things couldn't get worse, but the 19th century was just brutal. First, they picked the wrong side in the Napoleonic Wars, and the British showed up and bombarded Copenhagen. Then they had to give Norway to Sweden, ending a 400-year union. And the final crushing blow came in 1864, when they lost even more territory, Schleswig-Holstein, to a rising Prussia. It was just one loss after another. But this is where the story gets really amazing. Instead of just giving up, the Danes adopted a new philosophy. Basically, what we've lost on the outside, we have to rebuild on the inside. So no more dreams of empire. Instead, they poured all their energy into the land they had left. They became pioneers in agriculture. They created a new sense of community and education. And they started building the very first foundations of the modern welfare state we know today. Okay, so that massive internal rebuild brings us into the modern era, where Denmark had to figure out its new role in a world of global conflicts. They tried to stay neutral in World War I, but in World War II, they were occupied by Germany. And during that incredibly dark period, they pulled off something truly heroic. The Danish resistance managed to rescue almost all of the country's Jewish citizens. After the war, they realized neutrality wasn't an option anymore, so they became founding members of the UN and NATO. They're deeply involved in Europe, even if they kept their own currency. And just to bring that monarchy story all the way to the present, in 2024, we saw the throne pass peacefully from Queen Margrethe II to her son, King Frederick X, continuing that incredibly long line. So there you have it, from Viking conquerors who terrorized Europe to the architects of one of the world's most famous welfare states. It's an absolutely incredible story of losing everything and then reinventing yourself from the ground up, which really makes you wonder, what's next for them?